All right, thank you very much, Brent, for that introduction, and thank you for asking me to be here today and asking me to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about. So as Brent said, my name is Ismael Fernandez, and I am City Councilman in Wilder, born and raised here in the Treasure Valley. But first and foremost, what I want to do is I want to thank you all for what you do and for your service. I know that being a bus driver can oftentimes be a thankless job, especially as the kids get older. But you really do have an important job, and you have a very special job. And I hope you recognize that, because you do so much more than just take students to and from school. And you do so much more than just take students to different events and different games. For your students, you very well may be the first person that they see in the morning. And you very well may be the last person that they see at the end of their day. And you're also a support and role model for your students. So I really do want to thank you for what you do, and I mean that sincerely. So, as I said, I'm here to talk about bullying. And bullying, without a doubt, is a serious problem throughout our nation. And to start this presentation, rather than giving you facts like how 160,000 students skip school every day as a result of bullying, or how verbal bullying is still the most common form of bullying, I would like to talk to you about my own personal story as a victim of bullying. So my story really begins in elementary school. And to give you an idea, I went through bullying for 8 years, so pretty much the large majority of my schooling. And it started as teasing in the 2nd grade. And that's when I first got glasses. I've been wearing glasses ever since then. And of course, I got the usual, people call me Four Eyes, different things like that, But that was just from kids at my grade level. A lot of us, we really didn't know, that much. So on the bus, though, it was a different story. On the bus, I was dealing with kids who were my age, and I was dealing with students who were older than me. And on that bus, I had 2 high school students who bullied me. And they would call me names, such as a derogatory word for gay people. And as an elementary student, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, I had no idea what that word meant. But I knew it was supposed to hurt me. And I would learn later in middle school what that word meant. And I can tell you it did hurt a lot. To this day, I can't even use that word or think of this word. Not that I would want to or anything, but I can't even think of the word, even when talking about my experiences. They would also make fun of my voice and my physical stature. I guess for high schoolers back then, 4th graders should already look like Lou Ferrigno or something. But, and I tell you, I did not. So I informed the bus driver what was going on. And all she did was say, "Hey, knock it off." That wasn't a very effective way of intervening. And she wasn't too sure how to intervene. And I understand that, and I do want to put this footnote in there that you guys, all of you, really do have a little more difficulty when it comes to dealing with bullying. Because, for teachers, they deal with large class sizes, but for you, you're dealing with a lot of students, and on top of that, you always have to pay attention to the road. So I understand that it is difficult. But I think we could all agree that that was not a very effective way of dealing with that situation. And from that point on, the bullying continued, and it actually got worse. So these high school students didn't even know me or my sister personally, because they also would pick on my sister. She's my big sister. She's only 2 years older than me, but she has never failed to come to my defense. And they would make fun of her for that, and they would then make fun of me even more for that. But they didn't know me. They would just sit near us and start bullying me. However, I did recognize one of them as the son of a teacher at my elementary school. And so I went up to her, and I told her, "Hey, this is what your son is doing." And after that, the bullying stopped. But I had to go to the student's mother to finally get something, to finally get a result of that. So I was taken off the bus for different reasons, but from that point on, I didn't ride the school bus anymore. Now, going into middle school, the bullying got even worse. Now, keep in mind, my generation has grown up with technology and the internet. And as I was going through middle school, cell phones were becoming very accessible, and social media was being discovered by my peers. So in middle school, I began to experience what we call social bullying, which is when students knowingly exclude another student from their group or from different activities like that. And starting in 5th grade and really going on to 8th grade, I was really struggling to find a group to belong to. Because, you know, people say that as you go through school, you won't keep the same friends that you did the year before. And I found that to be very true. And I can tell you to this day, I only have one friend that I have continuously had since elementary school, kindergarten to be exact. And sure enough, starting in middle school, I found that many of the friends I had, or starting middle school, I found that many of the friends that I had in elementary school were no longer my friends in middle school. And in fact, many of those friends I had in elementary school became some of my harshest bullies in middle school. Now, I really struggled to accept that, because in elementary school, like a lot of elementary students, I was very optimistic and very happy, despite what I had gone through. And I truly did believe that middle school would be better, because that's what all the teachers would say. They said it was going to get a lot harder too, but they said it would get better. And I really couldn't understand how I had peers who were good friends the year before, and then bullies the next. And also in middle school, different groups or cliques were formed as well. And I never really fit into one, because there's always one group that didn't like me for one reason, and another group that didn't like me for another reason. And I still had friends, but I still didn't feel accepted. And so in 6th grade, I went to the school counselor to tell him about what was going on. And all he said was, boys will be boys. Kids will be kids. You got to learn how to toughen up. So that really impacted me. And it really taught me to just remain silent and not to tell anybody what was going on. So starting in 6th grade, I didn't talk about what was going on. Also in 6th grade, I got my first cell phone. And my 6th grade self would tell you that it was about time. You see, by 6th grade, everybody got a cell phone. Well, that might be an over-exaggeration, but by the time students were in 5th grade, I had a lot of friends and a lot of people I knew who already had cell phones. And so I constantly nagged my grandmother about getting me a cell phone. I'd tell her, I need a cell phone, Grandma. I need a cell phone, Grandma. And she was very reluctant to do so, understandably, because I can't think of a lot of people who are excited or willing to give a 6th grader a cell phone. Although nowadays, my sister is going into 7th grade and she already has an iPad, and I don't. So things are changing, I guess. But as I started participating in different school events and clubs, she got me a cell phone, and she told me, you know, you use it for emergencies or for when you need a ride during after-school hours. Because there are times when I would stay behind and talk to a teacher, or I was part of a club, and so the cell phone was used for that purpose. And I was very excited. You know, technology has always fascinated me. And it was one of those like prepaid cell phones where you buy the cards at the store and it gives you a certain amount of minutes for a month. And back then, that was a pretty good deal for me. Looking back on it now, I would say it wasn't that great of a deal. But, you know, cell phones really can serve a good purpose. Yeah, I mean, you could use them in emergencies where a landline isn't very accessible. You can use them now to find out information like who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1875. You know, information that you really don't need, but you look up anyway. And you can use a phone as a GPS, though I don't do that often because as soon as I make a wrong turn, I know I'm going to hear Siri say, "Turn around now, turn around now." And I kid you not, I'll be on the freeway and Siri will tell me, "Make a U-turn and turn around now." And I would say, "No thank you, Siri, I would like to live for a few more years." But you see, cell phones really can be useful except for the moments where Siri decides to become homicidal. But they also can be used for a lot of harm. And I learned that in the 7th grade. As you see, as any adolescent who sees a cell phone for the first time, I gave my number to my friends and to different people, and that worked out well for me for a while. But one day in 7th grade, I received a text calling me that one derogatory word for gay people. I didn't recognize the number, and to this day I still don't know who sent me that text. And unfortunately, it wasn't the last. I continued to receive other texts, and towards the end of my 7th grade year, I did receive some that told me to kill myself. At this point, I realized that bullying had become a lot easier, and it became a lot more complicated to figure out who was behind it. Also in 7th grade, I was being bullied in my band class. And again, it was verbal bullying by students who were a lot older than me. And this time, my grandma did find out, and my grandmother and I told my band teacher. And he ended up kicking one of the band students out of the program because of repeated episodes of bullying. The other students stopped bullying me for a while because it was a group of around 3 boys. However, one day they began to bully me again because the teacher wasn't there and we had a substitute. And so I went to the principal to tell her about what was going on. And her response to me was far different from the band teacher's. She told me that, and I quote, "You don't know how to get along with other people, and you just need to learn how to work with others." So, which I was kind of insulted because I think that I work well with others, but she didn't. And so rather than try to mediate the situation, she made me set up a Christmas tree outside of the school's office with one of my bullies. And nobody was supervising us. She'd come in once in a while and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" But there was no adult supervision. So the summer after my 7th grade year, I began to have convulsions, kind of like seizures. And I had no idea what was going on. I was hospitalized for 3 days at the Salt Luke's Pediatric Hospital, and the doctors didn't know what was going on either. So they finally came to the conclusion that the convulsions were a result of stress and anxiety. So I was referred to counseling. In 8th grade, the social and verbal bullying intensified, and I started struggling in school. I wasn't performing as well as I usually did. I went from being a straight A student to having C's, B's, D's, and F's. I started to miss school days because I simply didn't want to go and deal with the other students. I would just say I was sick and just stay home. So in my 8th grade year, I was diagnosed with depression and an anxiety disorder by my counselor. And she didn't know what I was depressed about. You see, throughout my schooling, as I said, I learned to remain silent. And I learned that remaining silent was a lot easier and a lot safer than talking to somebody. So I didn't talk about my bullying to anyone. I didn't talk to my school officials. I didn't talk to my family. And I didn't talk to my counselor. As the years as the year progressed, things really didn't get any better. And it really got to the point where I seriously contemplated suicide. And I really felt hopeless at that point. I felt like no one was taking me seriously, and I hardly found any support from my peers. I told my counselor how I was feeling, and she called my grandma and my mom in to attend my next session, and she informed them about what was going on. And as you can imagine, my grandma and my mom weren't very happy. And they were shocked and they were really upset, especially about the lack of support that I was receiving from the school. So during my second semester of 8th grade, my grandma and I decided I was going to attend school at the school district that my grandma worked at, which was the Parma School District. And it was a little ironic because on my last day of school at my old school district, many of the people who had bullied me were saying, "We're going to miss you so much, Ismael, and I'm so sorry you were being bullied." Things truly did get better when I switched schools. I was a little sad since I personally feel that a victim of bullying should never feel like they have to switch schools to find peace. But it ultimately was the best decision for me. You see, the new school I attended had very effective policies to deal with bullying and create a safe environment. And my new peers were very open to accepting me and made me feel welcome. I would continue to go to counseling until my senior year of high school. That's around 5 years. However, my new school really did empower me to turn my negative experiences into a force for good. So during my freshman year of high school, I spoke at 2 anti-bullying assemblies in Wilder and Parma middle schools. I was also asked by then Senator Melinda Smizer to participate in an anti-bullying conference that she was organizing for school counselors. And on top of that, I also became active in the legislature and asking our legislators to strengthen our state's bullying prevention laws. So that continued throughout high school, and I graduated in 2015, and I was accepted to the College of Idaho. And there I am studying history and Spanish. And after that, I'm hoping to either go to graduate school and get my PhD in history, or go further in my career of public service. You see, my experiences with bullying ultimately pushed me into a career where I can serve other people. In June of last year, I began to think about what I wanted to do with my life. Because after you graduate high school, everybody starts asking you, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do now? And so I found out the last week of June that we had a city council member who decided to retire. And the mayor at the time was encouraging me to run for that seat. And so I ultimately, after talking to different community members and seeing what support I could possibly have, I declared my candidacy and started campaigning for the office. As I campaigned, I began to hear from people who wanted their voices heard, but weren't too sure how to go around it. I had people tell me that they wanted to participate in our city, but they just didn't know how. As a victim of bullying, I had an idea of what they felt. So I made only one promise when I campaigned. You know, politicians, we love to make promises, a bunch of promises, but I only made one. If I am elected, I will listen to you. I will ask for your input and your participation. I won't shut you down. I will work for you. So come election day, I am nervous. I had school that day. I couldn't even focus in class. And luckily, I only had 2 classes on that day. Unfortunately, one of them was my math class. I had 4 other opponents, all of them a lot older than me, and all of them have been in Wilder for a lot longer than I have. One of them was a sitting city councilman who had spent 24 years, was completing his 24th year on the city council, and was running for another 4. At the end of the night, I ended up receiving the most votes in the election, a resounding landslide victory of 60 votes. I am currently the youngest city council member in the state of Idaho. And 7 months into my first term, I have really made sure to keep my promise of advocating for those who feel like they aren't being heard. So that is my story. I was able to overcome my experiences and do something positive. But there are so many students who don't know how to do that. I have a few tips, if you will bear with me, that may help, because as I said before, you guys, all of you have a difficult job when it comes to bullying. But the first tip I have is to really learn about bullying and what to look for. Now, there are so many different forms of bullying. There's verbal bullying, physical bullying, social bullying, and cyberbullying. The second tip I have is try not to argue or try to convince the student who's being bullied. You know, throughout my schooling, when I did talk to somebody about it, they would always say, "Are you sure you're being bullied? I guess, are you sure? Isn't that just teasing? Are you really sure?" If a student feels like they're being bullied, they are being bullied. And that has to be taken seriously. Be calm and assertive when dealing with a student who's being a bully. And make sure when you can to use that student's name. You know, don't just say, "Hey, you, knock it off." You know, because a lot of kids aren't going to take that too seriously. But if you say, "Hey, Adam, knock it off," you know, that's the equivalent of my grandma telling me, "Ismael Ricardo Fernandez, you better stop what you're doing." The fourth tip is environment, environment, environment. And when you're driving bus, as I'm sure you all do already, and you already know, try to create a positive environment for your students. You know, how a student's day goes really can be determined on the bus. And as you heard, I learned that from personal experience. So learn and use your students' names, especially for the younger kids. You know, they love that. Recognize positive actions. You know, if somebody gives up their seat for another student, for them to be more comfortable, or they help another student off the bus, recognize those positive actions that they do. And use positive verbal and nonverbal interactions with your students. You know, smile at them, nod, say hello, ask them how they're doing. You know, these tips I'm sure you're all aware of. And many of you, if not all of you, are already using them. But I can tell you that as a victim of bullying, these actions, however small they may seem, really can be very impactful. So to close, I really would just like to repeat what I said at the beginning, which is you all have a very important and special job. that it's so much more than just driving a bus. You really do support our students, and you act as a role model for them. For many of these students, you are the first person they see in the morning, and you very well may be the last person they see at the end of their day. So I hope that I didn't bore you all too much, and thank you very much for what you do.